My goal for today is to study with you a Yerushalmi in the third parak of Kiddushin. Now, we don't usually learn Yerushalmi, that's a little bit atypical, but Rabbi Chanan, Zecher Tzadik v'Kodesh L'Bracha, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, sees an amazing chidush in this Yerushalmi that'll touch on the entire question of what's the difference between a doraisa and a derabanan. As we indicated last time, the distinctions between those two are blurred or ambiguous. We opened up the Rambam in Hilchas Mamrim, and we saw that a Zaken Mamre who argues against the Sanhedrin Agdola about the status of chametz in the 6th hour, let's call it 11 a.m., like we are now, the 6th hour of Erev Pesach, he will be put to death with a chiyuv chenek as a Zaken Mamre. This, despite the fact that a Zaken Mamre is only chayav if he argues in a chiyuv kares. Here, he's arguing about a chiyuv derabanan, a rabbinic law of chametz in the 6th hour. Certainly, that's not a chiyuv kares. You know, if somebody eats chametz in the 6th hour, you know, you could give him maybe makas mardus. You know, he's a rebellious person, rebelling against the chachamim, but he's not over the doraisa of chametz, and he's certainly not guilty and liable for a chiyuv kares, which the Rambam says is a precondition for the debate and the contention between the Sanhedrin and the Zaken over a chiyuv kares. How does the Rambam say that, on the other hand, here he is arguing with the Sanhedrin over chametz, which itself has a chiyuv kares to it, and therefore he's a Zaken Mamre? So that the distinctions between the Derabanan and the Doraisa are really like crumbling in front of our eyes, as if to say that the Rabbanon are empowered to create something which is recognized by the Torah itself and is upgraded to the status of a Doraisa. And we were very perplexed by this because a Derabanan is a Derabanan. You know, the Torah tells us to listen to the rabbis, but that doesn't make it into a Doraisa. And to prove that point, we said that if you have a suffix, any sort of a doubt in a Derabanan case, then you go l'kula, and you're more lenient. If you have a doubt about a Doraisa, you go l'chumra. So no one could question the distinction, and a very fundamental one, between a Doraisa and a Derabanan, yet the Rambam is saying that as soon as the Zaken rebels against the Sanhedrin about a Derabanan, he refuses to accept the Gzeira Derabanan of the 6th hour that prohibits chametz, then he's considered as if he argues with them on the highest level, the most severe level of a chiyuv kares, which means that once the Rabbanan establish chametz on the 6th hour, basically what we end up with is a doraisa with a chiyuv kares. So you've upgraded a derabanan to the level of a chiyuv kares, as if to say that the ruling of the Zaken Mamre, when he says that chametz is mutter in the 6th hour, is a ruling which is called in Lashon Kodesh hora'ah, hey vav reish aleph hey, hora'ah. That hora'ah has a status of a doraisa.
When did it become the halacha that it's only considered Zaken Mamre on a karet related issue? Was that a machloket?
No, that's a Gemara in Masechta Sanhedrin, which we'll get to in our Chabur is learning Masechta Sanhedrin, and we're going to get to that in Parak Elu Hein HaNechnokim, which is the 10th parak of Sanhedrin, and the Gemara addresses the issue of Zaken Mamre, and the Gemara derives from Psukim that Zaken Mamre is only chayav if he argues on something that generates a chiyuv kares. And yet the Rambam goes ahead and he extends it and broadens the scope to cholak aleim b'gzerim and agzeros shegazu b'davar sheyesh bo zdona kares. So they're arguing now about Gzera. Did the Chachamim institute Gzera prohibiting chametz in the 6th hour? And the Zakei Mamre insists that no, there was never such a Gzera that was accepted. And he continues to issue his verdict and ruling that you're allowed to eat chametz in the 6th hour, despite the decision that was handed down by the High Court. And the Rambam says that even though he's arguing with them about a Gzera, because the 6th hour is not Doraisa, nevertheless, it's Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares. What do you mean, Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares? Not that he's going to violate Kares by eating in the 6th hour, Chas v'sholom, but it's a Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares. The word Davar here in the Rambam, as we saw last week, refers to Chametz. Chametz itself as an entity is a Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares. And if there's a machlokas about a davar sheish bo kares, namely about chametz, even if the machlokas is only about a gzera derabanan, then that's a machlokas on a davar sheish bo kares. Hence, the Zakei Mamre is chayav for denying the gzera and ruling against the Beis Din HaGadol in the gzera of chametz in the 6th hour. I mean, what seems to be going on here is that the Derabanan are extending the Doraisa. It's not that the Derabanan are coming up with an independent entity, an Isur Gzera of the 6th hour called Chametz Derabanan. It's not Chametz Derabanan, like a new entity. Are you familiar with the phrase Panim Chadoshes Bo'olakan? There's like a new identity here. No, there's no new identity, says the Rambam. It's the old, well-trodden Chametz. It's only Derabanan. Derabanan are somehow empowered to create chametz. But again, keep in mind, it's not that Derabanan are creating something that looks like chametz and smells like chametz, but it's not really chametz. It's not that Derabanan are pulling the wool over our eyes and calling the 6th hour chametz, but that the Torah itself recognizes the authority of the Chachamim to create chametz. But it's chametz. It's not a new creation. It's the old chametz. Because the Rambam establishes that a Zakei Mamre could only be chayav if there's a machlokas about a davar sheish bo kares. So the davar itself, even though it's only a gzera derabanan, is a davar sheish bo kares. The Rabbanan create a new entity called chametz, which is now recognized by the Torah. Again, the punishment level still remains a violation of a gzera derabanan. We can't go beyond that. If you eat chametz in the 6th hour, you have at the end of the day just violated a derabanan. But what the main thrust and the breakthrough, and I call it a revolution of the Rambam, is that the Rabbanan created chametz. What do I mean they created chametz? It's not a new creation, but they created a 6th hour, which is now an extension of chametz. Chametz doesn't begin with the 7th hour, but it begins with the 6th hour, according to the Sanhedrin Agdol, okay, and according to the Zakei Mamre. No, chametz doesn't emerge until the 7th hour. But this machlokas between the Chachmei Sanhedrin and the Zakeim, says the Rambam, is a machlokas about chametz on a doraisa level. You start with the gzera, but you end up with the doraisa. When the Zakei Mamre issues a hora, his verdict, his ruling, that you're allowed to eat chametz in the 6th hour, he is basically saying that chametz doesn't begin until the 7th hour. And in that sense, he's arguing about chametz. And the Torah is saying that you are a Zakei Mamre, you're going to be put to death because the Torah is recognizing that chametz exists in the 6th hour. Why? Because the Rabbanan said it is. Who are you? With all due respect to the Chachamim, let's not break down the walls of the distinction between a doraisa and a derabanan. The Torah didn't recognize chametz in the 6th hour. Comes along the Rambam and he says, wait a minute, when the Rabbanan make the gzera prohibiting chametz in the 6th hour, now the Torah recognizes chametz in the 6th hour. And now there's a machlokas between the Zakei Mamre and the Beis Din about a davar sheyesh bo chiv kares. So that the Sanhedrin Agdola has now created an extension rule in which the shem chametz, the entity of chametz as a halachic legal entity, emerges in the 6th hour. And that's a dover sheish bo karetz. Once the Rabbanan established that there's an Isur chametz in the 6th hour, anyone who argues and tries to undermine and contest against that ruling is arguing about a chametz of an Isur karetz, a dover sheish bo karetz. And that's what Rabbi Chanan saw in this Rambam. And he was very upset when he looked into the Kesef Mishnah, which means he's turning back the clock 5 centuries to Rav Yosef Cairo, who says that, you know what the Rambam means? The Rambam means something entirely different. The Rambam means that a man said to a woman, Harei at mekudeshes li b'chametz zeh, during the 6th hour. And the Sanhedrin said she's not married. Why? Because we established chametz in the 6th hour, and therefore the chametz is worthless. The Zaken then said, no, I recognize this marriage because it's not chametz until the 7th hour. And in the 6th hour, she can have a blast with the chametz. She can make French toast. She could sell the chametz on the market.
Why can't she wait a week and after Pesach?
Because chametz shavuot Pesach is also prohibited. So she won't gain anything by holding on to the chametz. It only becomes asur from now until doomsday. So it's worthless from the perspective of the Sanhedrin Agdola. She did not receive a shava pruta. She can't get any benefit. She can't sell it. She can't feed it to a dog. Nothing. Zero. It's all out the window. It's worthless. It's garbage, pardon the expression. Or as the Brits would say, it's rubbish. And therefore, the Kedushin is not valid. Anyone can come along and have a relationship with her without violating the Isur Eishes Ish, which is certainly an Isur Kares, and worse. Comes along the Zaken Mamre, and he says, name, she is an Eishes Ish. I recognize that marriage because there's no Isur chametz in the 6th hour. So basically, the Kesef Mishnah, in his view, in his understanding of the Rambam, has stripped this Rambam of any sort of far-reaching revolution. The Rambam is not saying anything revolutionary. The Rambam is only talking about a case where a man was Makadish and Isha in the 6th hour on Erev Pesach with chametz. And now there's a machlokas about a chiyuv karetz. According to the Chachamim, there's no Kiddushin, it's Ein Bo Shava Pruta, and according to the Zaken Mamre, it's a valid Kiddushin, she's an Eishes Ish, and if somebody has a relationship with her, he will be put to death, she will be put to death with Edom and Asra, etc., and therefore we have now a contention, says the Kesef Mishnah, on a Dover Sheyesh Bo Kares. Whereas the Rebbe Chanan says, no, that's not what it says in the Rambam. The Rambam says, Cholak alem b'gzerim and exeros. They're only arguing about the gzera. Nobody took chametz and gave it to a woman. That's not the issue at stake. Shegazu b'davar, meaning in chametz, the word davar means chametz. According to Kesef Mishnah, the word davar means issues, marriage. B'davar sheyesh b'shigagosel chatus u'mizdono kares. Kigon shehiter chametz. But when was the Zaken Mater chametz? In the 6th hour. So the machlokus is on exerim and exeros, but it's b'davar sheyesh bo kares. Two totally different understandings of the Rambam. He writes here, again, this we saw last week, I want to read it again, because a week is Kedei Shichecha, at least for me. He says, I don't understand the Kesef Mishnah. Why is there an issue that divides, or the dispute is about kares? Is mitneisha chametz who davar says don't know kares. It's because of the status of chametz. And according to the Kesef Mishnah, they could have an argument about anything. Orla, for example. The Sanhedrin Agdola ruled that Orla is asur b'hana, and therefore it's worthless. The Zaken says, no, Orla is not Asur Bano. You could benefit from Orla. So you have the trees that are producing for the first 3 years, says the Zaken, scoffing at the Chachamim, rebelling. He says, take those fruits and sell them to a god. Make a crash on the market. Why not? Orla is also bachila, but it's mutabana. That's the Zaken Mami's ruling. Then a man comes along, takes Orla, gives it to a woman. According to the Kesef Mishnah, we have to put the Zaken Mami to death. Orla has no chiyuv kares. Orla could never generate a chiyuv kares. Never, ever. So they're arguing now about Orla, whether it's Asur Bano or not. The Kesef Mishnah says in such a case, despite the fact that Orla could never, ever reach a level of kares, we're going to put the Zaken Mami to death. Why? Because the man was Makadosh and Isha with Orla. And now there's a dispute as to how to evaluate this Kedushin. Is it valid or not? The Chachamim invalidate the Kedushin because Orla is Asur Bano, it's worthless. Let it go up in smoke. And the Rabbana and the Zaken Mami is saying, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Orla is Mutar Bano, the Kedushin is valid, and she's an Eishes Ish. Says Rabbi Chanan, I don't get it. That's not what it says in the Rambam. In the Rambam it says that Cholak Alem B'Gzerim and Agzer Shegazu B'Davar Sheyesh Bo Chiyuv Karetz. Orla is not a Davar Sheyesh Bo Chiyuv Karetz. Clearly, the Kunsh's Divrei Sofer Rabbi Chanan has a totally different understanding of the Rambam Hilchos Mamrim with regard to the machlokes between the Sanhedrin and the Zaken Mamre in the case of the 6th hour Erev Pesach of Chametz. But at this point, Rabbi Chanan says to us, take out the Rambam. So I think you have it, hopefully, in your WhatsApp or whatever. I'm going to just get myself a Rambam. So just excuse me for a minute. I don't know my way around the base register so well, but I think I'll find the Rambam. Just a second. Oh, okay. So until now, Rabbosai, we've been studying Perek Dalid Halacha Aleph. And in Halacha Aleph, the Rambam gives that example of the Zaken Mamre who ruled that chametz is mutter in the 6th hour. That's Halacha Aleph. But Rabbi Chanan challenges us to go on to Halacha Beis. Now, Halacha Beis, as you'll notice, is gigantic. And since I want to get to the Yerushalmi, instead of reading word for word tediously, navigating through this long Rambam, I'm just going to highlight certain parts of the Rambam. The Rambam says the following: there are two categories of cases in which the Zaken Mamre is chayav. Echad, number one, shenechleku, he disputes the Sanhedrin b'davar shechayavan al zdono kares al shigas al chatos. That we've seen in Halacha Aleph. Now he adds another category. Oh, shenechleku b'davar hamevi lidei davar shechayavam al zdono kares val shigas al chatos. Now, obviously, the Rambam is not repeating what he said in Halacha Aleph. So we're no longer talking about chametz in the 6th hour or anything similar to that. So let's just see if we can figure out what the Rambam here in Halacha Beis in this second category is adding to what he already established in Halacha Aleph. And here in Halacha Beis is he's talking about davar hamevi lidei davar. It's like a chad gadya, like a domino theory. Hamevi lidei davar shechayovim, etc., etc. Ketzad. Nechleku be'isha zu imhi erva im lav. Okay, that seems to be a chiyuv kares. Im mare dam zeh metame be'isha o lo. Again, nida is a chiyuv kares. Im zut mea leda o lo. Im hizava o lo. Chelev, asur, muta. Chelev, all the above are chiyuvei kares. V'chol kayotzi ba'elu, etc., etc., says the Rambam. Hareza cholik b'davar shechayov, etc., zdono kares. Oh, now we get to the second category. Ketzad davar hamevi lidei davar shechayovim al zdono kares al shigos achatos. Kigon. Shenechleku be'ibur shana im ma'abrim ad purim. Oh, bechol adar. Okay, so then when is chametz going to emerge as a chiyuv kares? It all depends on whether you ma'abra the shana. If they were ma'abra the shana, they added an extra month. They extended Adar from 1 month to a second Adar, and then Nisan becomes pushed off by another month. So the Rambam says now, if there's going to be a dispute about whether the yes ibur or no ibur, that's going to bring to a chiyuv kares. Why? Because if you have ibur, he's not chayav for eating chametz on that date, which according to the Zaken Mamre, denying ibur and rejecting ibur, then he's chayav on the first round of the 15th of Nisan, which for the chachamim after ibur is now the 15th of Adar Sheni. So they're certainly arguing here about a chiyuv kares. But that's not really what they're arguing about. The argument is about ibur, yes ibur or not ibur. Do we add another month or do we not? But in effect, they're arguing about when is chametz asur. So chametz, according to the chacham, is going to be asur the second month, meaning after Adar Sheni, and according to the Zaken Mamre, it's in the first month, meaning the month of Nisan on a regular year. Now listen to the second example that the Rambam gives. Nechleku b'dinei momenos, b'din midinei momenos. In other words, the Sanhedrin issued a verdict that this moment belongs to Reuven, and the Zaken says no, it belongs to Shimon. O b'minyan hadayonim shedonim dinei momenos. Let's say the Bezdin issues the verdict that 3 dayanim are sufficient to determine dinei momenos, monetary ownership. And the Zaken says, no, we need a larger Bezdin. 3 is not enough. Harei Zachai. We'll put the Zaken Mamre to death. Where's the chiyuv kares here? It's not like the first example of Ibur, where the question is, when is chametz asur? Sharei, lidvarav shel zeh, sha'omer shezeh chayav lazeh, within the dispute in a monetary case, you have Reuven and Shimon, we'll call them. So according to Reuven, Shimon owes him 1,000, And now the Bezdin will paskin and rule in favor of Reuven. That means the plaintiff. So they ruled that the money has to go from Shimon back to Reuven. It's Reuven's money. He has rights to that money. Kol shenatal mimenu. Reuven now takes the money from Shimon. Let's say he gets a juridic, let's say, decision that he takes to the bank, and he takes money out of Shimon's bank. Kid did natal. He has rights to that money. Al pi Bezdin natal, because Bezdin gave him a fair ruling in his favor that the money that Shimon is holding on to is really Reuven's money. Ulidvar shel zeh, but Shimon is claiming he's potter. Comes along the Zakei Mamre, and he rules in favor of Shimon. Or alternatively, Osha Omar, the Zakei Mamre declares and rules that Ein Elu Ru'uyim Ladun, that these judges cannot and have not the authority to rule in Dinim Ominous. And therefore, Kol Shenatal, if Reuven, according to the Zakei Mamre, now takes the money out of Shimon's possession, Gezel hu biyado. He's a thief. Because the ruling in favor of Reuven is an invalid ruling, either because, according to the Zakei, Shimon's claim as a defendant is the correct claim, or because the Bezdin is not entitled to issue such a ruling and take money out of the possession of Shimon and give it to Reuven. But again, according to the Zakei Mamre, if Reuven puts his hand into Shimon's pocket and takes out the money, he's a no good thief. He's a gazlan. So what? Why is that called kares? In the case of chametz, if you add another month, they're arguing about when chametz is asur. That's clearly a machlokas, a dispute about kares. But here they're arguing about whether Reuven sticking his hand into Shimon's pocket is a gazlan. Well, where's the kares over here? Says the Rambam, and I'm going to ask you in a minute, what does this sound like to you in the machlokas that we had earlier about halacha aleph between the Kesef Mishnah and Reb Elchanan? Says the Rambam, Im kidesh bo ishar. Reuven takes the money out of the pocket of Shimon, out of his bank account, based on the psak din of the Sanhedrin, and he gives it to Rachel, and he says, Harei mekudeshes li. According to the Zakei Mamre's ruling, as a rebellion against the Sanhedrin, he's a gazlan. You cannot be makadesh an isha with money of gzela, and therefore ain't a mekudeshes. If, on the other hand, you accept the Chachamim Shita and Reuven had rights to take it from Shimon, because we ruled in favor of Reuven in this monetary case, then Reuven is not a gazlan. He's holding on to his own money. And lo natal, meaning he didn't take it as a gazlan, is therefore when he gives that money to an isha and his makadisha, is haba aleha chayav haretz. Nimtza hadavar mevi lidei davar shechayav al zdodo kares, and therefore the Zakei Mamre is put to death. So they're arguing about dini mamanos, who is the rightful owner of this mammon, and the Rambam says that this is a davar hamevi lidei davar shechayav kares, because if Reuven is a gazlan, then the ishus is not valid. If, on the other hand, as the Sanhedrin ruled, Reuven has rights to that money, then he's not a gazlan and the kedushin is valid. So they're arguing about a davar sheish bo kares. Who does that sound like to you, Rabbosai? Does that sound like the Kesef Mishnah, or does that sound like Reb Elchanan? I mean, don't all answer at once. You know, that's the problem with Zoom. You know, I don't know if you You have to mute or unmute and all the ganze business here. All right, I'm going to answer the question simply because I don't know why you're silent, but this sounds exactly like the Kesef Mishnah. Like we said that according to Kesef Mishnah, if there would be a dispute between the Chachamim and the Zokin about Orla, whether Orla is also Ba'na, then the Zokin Mamri would be Chayav. Why? Even though Orla can never lead to Kares, but yes, it could lead to Kares if and when he, Mr. Makadesh, takes Orla, gives it to a woman. And according to the Chachamim, that's nothing. It's not a Shav Pruta, it's Orla. And according to the Zakei Mamre, Orla is Mutter Ba'na, and therefore the Kedushin is valid. The same thing is what the Rambam is saying when they argue about whose mammon is it. Does it belong to Reuven and he has rights to take the money? Does it belong to Shimon and we rule in favor of Shimon? Says the Rambam, he's chayav, the Zakei Mamre, for ruling in favor of Shimon, he's chayav as a Zakei Mamre because it's a davar amevili de davar shechayav maleh kares. Because if he's makadosh and isha, he meaning Ruvain with this money, according to the Zakei Mamre, garnish vert. It's not an ishus. There's no ishus here. She's not an ishus ish because he's a gazlan. It's not his mama. It belongs to Ruvain. And when he sticks his pocket into Shimon, his hand into Shimon's pocket, he is a gazlan. The Kedusha is not valid. The Chacham say, no, we ruled in favor of Reuven. So it seems like the Rambam here in Halacha Beis is taking the position of the Kesef Mishnah's interpretation of Halacha Aleph, that if the dispute will somehow lead to an issue of Kedusha Isha, whether she's married or not married, a davar maybe they davar shechayav in a kares, that's enough to generate a chiyuv zakim mamre. Not the way we saw it in Rav Elchanan interpreting Halacha Aleph, that the Zokim Mamre is only chayav if he argues about some entity which is chayav kares. No. The Rambam is saying they're not arguing about an entity of chayav kares. They're arguing about gzela. Gzela is not a chayav kares like Orla. But since gzela and this dispute could lead to a case of Kedusha Isha, that's enough to be mechayev the Zokim. And this, I believe, is where Rabbi Elchanan gets himself into a bind. If you take a look in paragraph number Gimel on the right side of the first page I gave you, which you had last week, Hare Kosav a Rambam, etc., etc. Okay, we don't have to read through the whole paragraph. Ad kan l'shonos. If you fast forward 10 lines, Ein b'sham shesir kigon shenechluku im davar aser ba'na chayev nafkamina l'ni kedusha. Okay, he gives another case over here. Let's see if we have it. Besides the Dini Mominus case, he says here, again, if you want, we could go through the whole Rambam Barichus, but I think just to save time, he says, V'chenim nechleku ba'arifas ha'egla. So, there's a Parsha of Egla Rufa, and the Egla itself is Asur Ba'na, right? They break its neck, and you're not allowed to benefit from the carcass of the Egla. And now we have machlokas between the Sanhedrin and this Zaken. So according to the Zaken, there's not enough evidence to warrant the ceremony and the procedure of Egla Rufa. So when they did an Egla Rufa, according to the Zaken, it's nothing. It's garnished with garnished. You can take the nevela, the carcass, and do whatever you want, sell it. It's not asabano. But the Sanhedrin decided that, we found a slain body between two cities, blah, blah, blah. And all the conditions that were necessary to be met to generate the Parsha of Egla Rufa were met. And this Egla Rufa, therefore, is a valid Egla Rufa, and it's Asur Ba'na. Says the Rambam, if they're arguing about whether or not there's Egla Rufa, then the Zaken will be put to death. Why? According to the Sanhedrin, who in this case paskin that there is a Chiyuv Egla Rufa, Harehi Asur Bana. You're not allowed to benefit from Egla Rufa. The carcass is completely worthless. V'amakadish bo isha eina mekudeshes. V'chenim nechleku ba'arla. Basically, again, the machlokus is whether it's also mana. And the Rambam says that the zaken is put to death. So you see the case of Mishnah is right. The Kavan, the Svirle la Rambam, the Makadish Bisuri Anah, Derabanan Part II. So let's go back to the case of Chametz in the 6th hour. That's Isuri Anah Derabanan. And the Rambam Paskins in Hilchas Ishus, Eina Mekudeshes. V'gam Svirle Denasa Zaken Mamre Bidrabanan. So even though they're arguing about Chametz Derabanan, since if he were to Mekadesh an Isha with Chametz Derabanan, the Rambam says if it's Asur Mana, then there's no Kiddushin. Then the Rambam here in Halacha Beis would say an argument about Isur Ana and Chametz Derabanan, like the 6th hour, would have the same repercussions as an argument about Egla Rufa or about Arla, and the Zaken would be Chayav because the repercussion is whether we recognize the Ishus or not. Because the Rambam holds that even on an Isur Derabanan you can't be Mekadesh an Isha. That means the Torah doesn't recognize marriage, Ishus, in a case where he's Mekadesh with Isur Derabanan. That's a Rambam Hilchas Ishus in the 5th parak. Put that together with the Rambam here in Hilchas Mamrim, and we understand very well that if there's machlokus between the Sanhedrin and the Zaken about Chametz in the 6th hour, then there's going to be a repercussion with regard to Ishus, because even if the Isur Anon in the 6th hour is only Derabanan, the Ishus is not going to be Chal. Im Kain, now I go back to Halacha Aleph, says Rabbi Chanan, and I'm really perplexed. Lovely, why does the Rambam Litlos, he says the reason why in Chametz in the 6th hour he is Chayav as a Zaken Mamre is because Chametz has an Isur Kares. He goes back to the abstract status of Chametz as an Isur Kares. Forget about that. The Rambam says any argument about an Isur Hana, which would have implications as to whether or not the Kedushin is valid or not valid, is enough to be Mechayiv the Zaken Mamre. So even if I would have granted you that Chametz is only an Isur Lav, it's not an Isur Kares, it's like Orla, it's like Egla Rufa, which will lav him. Nevertheless, a machlokes about the status of an Isur Anah Derabanan in Chametz, like that of an Isur Orla, would it be enough to be Mechayiv the Zaken Mamre? So why did the Rambam have to add the stipulation in Halacha Aleph that the reason why the Zaken Mamre is Chayiv is because Chametz is an Isur Kares? Forget about Chametz is an Isur Kares. They're arguing about an Isur Anah. Typically, the nafkamina linyan kedushin dafilu b'shari suri anosha eno b'karis hatzman. Is that's enough to be mechayiv in Zaken Mamre? Kmo b'suri anah da'oraisa, like the Rambam's examples of Orla and Egla Rufa. Dafilu nechleku ba'orla she'ein ba'karis. Orla could never reach the level of karis. Mikom nasa Zaken Mamre shum nafkamina linyan kedushin. And kein ochinami im nechleku the Orla shel divreim gam kein nafkamina linyan kedushin, and the Zaken should be chayav. So he introduces here Orla mi divreim. Like, let's say, for example, there are certain fruit trees which maybe are not included in Orla, and the Rabbanan are going to say mitzad gzeira they're included in Orla, and even those fruit trees would be asur b'ano. If the Zaken argues on that, he should be chayav. So when the Rambam gives the example of Arla as Isuri Adna, it doesn't necessarily mean Arla Doraisa. Because again, if the nafkamina is Gabi Kedusha Isha, then even in an Isur Adna Derabanan, like Arla Derabanan or Chametz in the 6th hour, there would still be an nafkamina linear Kedusha Isha because the Rambam holds that a Makadish Isuri Adna Derabanan, Lo Avi Kedusha. So once again, the question is, why does the Rambam make a big deal about chametz that it's a davar sheish bo kares? Forget about davar sheish bo kares. Any machlokas on isuri ana on a drabanan level, like for example the 6th hour of chametz or orla drabanan, would lead to a chiyuv of zakei mamre because it would have the repercussion of whether or not the kedushin is valid. And now we're ready for the Yerushalmi. The issue here in the Yerushalmi, which is very fascinating, is whether or not the hafkas ishus, meaning the barrier that undermines the marriage act, the Maisa Kiddushin, is because of the isur or because of the valuelessness, is there such a word? The lack of value to the object. Rashi says, in Masechta Pesachim Daf Zayin, that if a person is Makadesh and Isha with, let's say, Chametz Nuksha, again, I don't want to get off on a tangent what Chametz Nuksha is, but suffice it to say that it's only Asur Midrabanan, then Rashi says that we apply the principle of Kol the Makadish Adai to the Rabbanim Makadish and Hefker Bezdin Hefker. And that's why the Kiddushin is not valid. But we're going to see in the Yerushalmi that the Yerushalmi is going to say that Isuri Ana are valueless. They don't have the value of a Shava Pruta. There's no need to invoke a very sophisticated halachic principle of called the Makadish, Adai to the Rabbanim Makadish, Hefker Bez and Hefker. Forget about all that stuff. The object is valueless. He didn't give her anything that's worth a Pruta. He quotes here Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says that there's something called Chad Rabbanan, there's something called Trade Rabbanan. Like, for example, Chametz Nuksha in the 6th hour is called Trade Rabbanan. It's only Chametz Midrabanan, and the 6th hour is only Derabanan. That's a double Derabanan. And in such a case, Rabbeinu Tam says the Kiddushin is valid. So Rav Chana asks the following question: what do you mean the Kiddushin is valid? It's Asur B'Ana. He didn't give her a Shava Pruta, it's valueless. Who cares whether it's one Derabanan or Trade Rabbanan? So we see here, both in Rashi and in his Einakol Rabbeinu Tam, that they're operating within the framework of halacha. Which halachic principle will operate here to undermine the Kiddushin and invalidate it? Is it, as Rashi says, called the Makadesh and Hefker Bez and Hefker, or as Rabbeinu Tam says, it's Trade Rabbanan? They're not operating within the framework of, is it a Shava Pruta or is it not a Shava Pruta? What benefit could she have from this chametz? Which would obviate the need for invoking all these different principles. But now he quotes the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi comes up with a fascinating distinction between kesef and shtar. You know that a man can be Makadish and Isha with kesef or with shtar. Now, what happens in a case where a man takes Arla which is Asur Ba'ano D'Oraisa, and he makes out of it a cloth. I think in English it's called a vellum. Maybe I'm not pronouncing it right. And he writes on this vellum, Harei at Mekudeshesli, and he gives her the shtar. And it's made of orla. It's also by Noam Midoraisa. And the Yerushalmi establishes Eina Mekudeshes. However, says the Yerushalmi, if he writes the shtar Kiddushin on Orla Derabanan, remember we said before that Derabanan extended Orla to trees and fruits that aren't included on a Deraisa level, then if he gave her the shtar, she is Mekudeshes. And I'm anticipating what I think Rabbi Elchanan is going to try to drive at from this Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi is not asking whether or not she got something that she could benefit from. Is it a shava pruta? Does it have the value of a pruta? Because what difference does it make whether it's Orla de Oraisa with an Isra Anot Minat Torah or Orla de Rabbanan? In which case, in both cases, she's clearly not getting anything of value. Says Rabbi Elchanan, Vatam nire dehada isuri ana ein bo chashivas mamon. You can attack this question of why the Kiddushin is not valid in Isur Ana from two different perspectives. Aleph, the befal, I would substitute the word b'mitzius, meaning in reality, eino shava klum. She didn't get anything. Goes up in smoke. She has no benefit from it. He asked the question, but why isn't that benefit? A guy is going to come along, he's willing to pay you money for it. Yeah, but you're not allowed to sell it to a guy. So for you, it's not worth anything. Bays. Okay, now here we get to heavy methodological breakthroughs here. So I would ask you to underline this if you printed it out. Shedin Torahu, the Torah is established that Isuri Ano Ein Bo Chashivas Mama. The Torah is established that which is asur b'hana is not called mama. Meaning, just like we said that something that's not a shova pruta, the Torah establishes it's not mammon. Now we have a different halacha. If something was prohibited by the Torah and Anah, you're not allowed to get any benefit for it. The Torah is saying it doesn't have the status of mammon. This is a purely legal proposition. Has nothing to do with mitzius. Has nothing to do with befar in the language of Rabbi Elchanan. Has nothing to do with whether she can benefit or she cannot benefit. V'nafkemida ben shnei atamim elu im nomar mishum shebefal eni yochel asin tamim ein nafkemida ben isur anon d'oraisa l'drabanan aval inei mishadin isur alav mafkia din mamon im kein b'isuri anon d'rabanan. He says the following. If you're looking at it from the perspective that Makadish B'Yisur Ana is not valid because she's not getting anything of value, it makes no difference whether the Yisur is D'Oraisa or D'Rabbanan. At the end of the day, bottom line is she gets no benefit from it, even though it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan. But if you're going to talk about Hafkas Chashivus Mammon, that the Isur itself removes the status of Mammon, then Yesh L'chalik, now we have to differentiate between an Isur Ana D'Oraisa, like Orla D'Oraisa, or Chametz D'Oraisa, as opposed to an Isur Ana D'Rabbanan, like Chametz in the 6th hour or the Chametz Nuksha. Because if the Isur is going to be mafkia the Mammon, the Shem Mammon, the Chashivus of Mammon, then on a Torah level, if this is only Asur D'Rabbanan, then on a Torah level it doesn't have a Shem Isur, and therefore it has the status of Mammon. It's only on a D'Rabbanan level that you can call it Hafkah Shem Mammon. But the Torah is going to recognize it as Mammon. So when he gives Arla, let's say he takes the vellum of Arla, D'Oraisa, and he writes a shtar on it, the Yerushalmi says that she's not Mekudeshes. But if he writes it on vellum of Orla D'Rabbanan, then the Orla Derabanan is not an Isa Doraisa, and therefore it doesn't have the power to be Mafkia L'Shem Mamon. Now we begin to understand Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam are looking high and low for some mechanism by which in Chametz Derabanan we could be Mafkia the Shem Mamon, the Chashivas of Mamon. It's only Aser Midrabanan. So Rashi has to stretch his arm out to call the Makadesh Adai Derabanan Makadesh and to Hefker Bezdin Hefker. Rabbeinu Tam has to stretch his arm out to trade the Rabbanon. It's one Rabbanon on the other. These are all halachic principles. Kevan shadavar tolui b'din isur, and Chad Rabbanon doesn't have the status of a din isur. V'zoi shitas Rashi v'tosis afkas din mama meisuri anahu gam kein din Torah. But lav mishum de befal eino shava kesef on page Peiches. And basically, what these Rishonim, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam are asking themselves, okay, you know what? The Rabbanan say you're not allowed to sell this chametz. So he goes ahead and he sells the chametz. He violates the Rabbanan. It's worth it for him if he's not an observant Jew so much, and he'll get a lot of money for it. Two different reasons. And that would apply even to an Isur Anah D'Rabbanan. The Od, and furthermore, should did Isur Mafkia Mama. The did Mama. Elo Shatam Asheni, but as we said before, here we differentiate between Isur Anah D'Oraisa and Isur Anah D'Rabbanan. Be Isur Anah D'Rabbanan, Yesh Bo did Mama. Elo D'Vafal, Ein Shava Klum. Here's the difference, says Yerushalmi, between Kiddushay Kesef and Kiddushay Shtar. In Kiddushay Kesef, she has to get something of value. And if it's also by Noah, even the Rabbanon, the Kiddushin is no Kiddushin, it's not valid. She didn't receive a Shavah. Well, the Kiddushay Shtar, and with this we'll conclude, Lo Be'inan Shavah Kesef. There's no requirement of Shavah Kesef in Kiddushay Shtar. But rather, there's a requirement of Mammon. You have to give us something that's called Mammon. And whether it's called Mammon depends upon the Isur. But the Isur has to be Doraisa. If he writes the Shtar on vellum of Orla D'Rabbanan, then the Shtar is valid. Because it has on a Doraisa level a din, a status of Mammon. If on the other hand he writes it on a Shtar, on the vellum on Orla Doraisa, then the Torah prohibits this Orla Doraisa as an Isur Anah, and that's enough to be mafkia the chashivas of Mammon. Rabbi Elchanan doesn't explain to us why Shtar depends upon din Mammon, whereas Kesef depends upon the reality of whether or not she got Hana of Mammon. So this is where we'll stop for today. We didn't talk about tzitzis, we didn't talk about shatnez, we didn't talk about esrog or lulav. And that, Amir Hashem, I'd like to talk to you about next week. Yeah, Arthur.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe we have to go back to why the Beis Din originally said the 6th hour, no chametz. We don't know exact time. We never know exact time. We know that the Raisa, the 7th hour, you're in trouble. So, but we know that the 7th hour starts at some point. We don't know the exact time. So so basically Sanhedrin extended it to the 6th hour. That because in part of that 6th hour, you have the 7th starting. We don't, again, because not everyone's clock is right. Therefore, it becomes a deraisa because basically it's a suffix, when you have a suffix on a deraisa, we go chumrah.
Arthur, everything you say is brilliant, but you still didn't answer Rabbi Elchanan's question. Why does the Rambam need that? Let's say it was like Isuri Anah D'Rabbanan, correct? And the Rama paskins that Makadish Isha Bisurei Hanod Rabban is not Mekudeshes. So then the Shtakim Mami should be Chayev, even if Chametz was not an Isa Kares. You're right. You're saying something gigantic. You're saying that the nature of this Gzeira is to establish a Shem Chametz in the 6th hour. But I'm just asking you, why does Rama need that? You're right. It could be you're right and it's true, but it should be irrelevant because the Rambam is saying in Halacha Beis that if the repercussion is whether Kedushin is valid or not, that should apply according to the Rambam Shita, even in Isra No Derabanan. All right, Beli Neder will pick this up again next week, and I'll remember what you said, and it's very good. Very, very good. Okay.